The fight to eliminate human trafficking, whether for sexual exploitation or for forced labor, in Cambodia or around the world, is a story of values on the one hand and on partnerships. And I just want to make some observations on Cambodia and more broadly on both counts, values and partnerships. The WFDD report about Cambodia is suffused with concerns that evangelicals are perhaps not so good at playing nice with other children of God, and that there is a dimension of proselytizing while assisting those who are victims, and perhaps that there is a greater predominance of faith over data and checking whether things work. But we should acknowledge the fact that values are quite very important to an effort to combat human trafficking. There's a need for a change of values, and while a change of values kind of leads people to worry that people are trying to foist a value system that is not the local culture, the local religion, human trafficking is a story of entire groups of people, whether they be women, children, migrants, minority groups, being written out from being treated as human beings in full. And whether you have a Kantian notion that human beings are all of equal value, or a Christian notion that they're all children of God, or a Buddhist view, or a Muslim view, that's important. So too, while looking at the fight against human trafficking in Cambodia and elsewhere, there needs to be a direct effort to try and change the view of the way people value, for instance, females and children, or how they devalue them. Changing minds is a very difficult thing, but if you look at the most recent U.S. Global Report on Human Trafficking, the profile on Cambodia reads, Cambodian men form the largest source of demand for child prostitution, though a significant number of men from the United States and Europe, as well as other Asian countries, travel to Cambodia to engage in so-called child sex tourism. Well, until men change their mind, the demand which drives human trafficking won't disappear. Why is there such a special focus on Cambodia? Well, there are a number of reasons that are laid out in the report and that Katherine has alluded to. But I do think the fact that children in sex trafficking have been the focus is particularly alluring to activists, secular and faith-based. And the fact that their children they're most vulnerable, but it also averts the great debates about adult sex trafficking victims and the degree of volition that lies there. And secondly, the notion that there are foreign child sex tourists, one of the great euphemisms of our time, sort of gives the sense that maybe outside actors have a responsibility to jump in because predators from the outside are going and preying on these children of Southeast Asia. Although, as I told you, as I referred to in the report, in fact, the chief customers are from Cambodia itself and the region. Now, the second factor, partnerships. When you talk about faith-based organizations, it ushers in the question of how valuable partnerships are to combating human trafficking. I really admire former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for raising up partnerships as an emphasis for the fight against human trafficking. It was actually one of the emphases of the previous administration as well. The Human Trafficking Office at the State Department, which I used to head, spends at least as much time and energy and certainly resources on aiding NGOs and other partners around the world as it does preparing a high-octane report that gives other countries grades. But if you look at a number of the concerns that are raised in the WFDD report about faith-based actors in Cambodia, you could say that many secular organizations and NGOs have some of the very same problems. Problems of coordination. In fact, at the beginning of the report, it reads, despite the successes of partnership efforts, there are ample issues of poor coordination among actors, both faith-inspired and secular. You also see among secular organizations in Cambodia and elsewhere tensions between those international actors swooping in and local actors, and insufficient ownership being left to local organizations to shape solutions. You see divergent views in the secular organizations about whether to prioritize sex trafficking or labor trafficking. I must say that most activists tend to care about one or the other much more than the reverse. One sees among secular organizations in Cambodia and elsewhere divergent views on whether you should focus on human trafficking and that the highest moral priority is to help the human trafficking victim in front of you, as opposed to dealing with the more diffuse systemic questions of poverty alleviation and job opportunities. You see divergent emphases on prosecution of the perpetrators versus victim protection versus longer-term prevention. And that's not just something that is an uncoordinated element of faith-based organizations. One of the particular debates about emphasis that I'm concerned about that is true of faith-based organizations but just as true of secular organizations is the respective emphasis on short-term victim protection, shelter, food, medical care, and longer-term rehabilitation or re-empowerment, the ability to have a job, to be have a stable life. There's just as much disagreement on volition in prostitution as an enabling environment of sex trafficking in the secular community as there is in the faith-based community, although there's a predominant tilt in each of those realms on this question. And there's a significant problem of how, having been objectified, victims of human trafficking turned into something less than human or sex commodities or mere cogs in globalization so that they are only commodities. There's a danger that those activists, faith-based or secular, end up objectifying the victim, treating them as less than human to show their cause, to mobilize others to be